The HOA president stood over my bleeding 8-year-old daughter, smoke still rising from the gun in her hand. My little girl had been drawing butterflies with chalk on our sidewalk. That was her only crime. That was the reason she now lay dying on our front lawn, clutching her shattered shoulder and screaming for me while her blood pooled beneath her small body. Before you hear this full story, please comment below and tell me which country you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories like this one. The sound of that gunshot echoed down Maple Grove Lane like a clap of thunder splitting open the sky. I was standing in my kitchen at the time with my hands elbow-deep in soapy dishwasher when I heard it. That sharp, unmistakable crack that makes your blood run cold and your heart stop beating. For just a split second, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a car backfiring. Perhaps it was leftover fireworks from the 4th of July, even though it was already September. My mind searched for any explanation except the truth. Then I heard my daughter scream my name. "Emma!" I don't have any memory of running. I can't recall throwing open the front door or racing down our driveway. The only thing I remember clearly is the sight that met my eyes on our front lawn, and the way my entire world stopped in that moment. My precious 8-year-old daughter was lying on the ground, clutching her shoulder. Blood was seeping out between her tiny fingers. Her face had gone white as a sheet, and her eyes were wide open with shock and pure terror. And standing right over her, with the gun still raised in her hand, was Margaret Henderson, the HOA president of our neighborhood. "She broke the rules," Margaret said in a cold, flat voice. Her thin lips were pressed together in a hard, disapproving line. "I warned you people. I warned all of you what would happen." Time seemed to move in slow motion and lightning speed all at the same moment. I dropped to my knees beside Emma, pressing my hands over hers. I could feel the warm, sticky blood. Too red, too much, too terrifyingly real. My baby was bleeding. My baby had been shot. "Mom," Emma whimpered through her tears. "Mom, it hurts so bad." "I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts," I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. "But you're going to be okay. I promise you, you're going to be just fine." But honestly, I didn't know if I was telling her the truth or a lie. I didn't know anything in that moment except that this woman, this neighbor who had made our lives absolutely miserable for the past 6 months, had just shot my child. "Someone call 911!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. Mrs. Patterson from the house next door already had her phone out. Her hands were trembling as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. Mr. Chen from across the street was running toward us as fast as he could. Other neighbors were coming out of their homes, drawn by all the commotion. The looks on their faces reflected the absolute horror I felt in my soul. "She was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk," Margaret announced, as if that simple statement explained everything. As if it justified anything at all. Section 7. Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no permanent or semi-permanent markings are allowed on any common areas. That includes all sidewalks. I stared up at her, completely unable to process the words coming out of her mouth. My daughter was bleeding right in front of us. She might be dying. And this woman was standing here citing HOA bylaws like she was discussing parking regulations. "You shot a child," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "You shot my baby over chalk drawings." "I enforced the community rules," Margaret corrected me, finally lowering the gun to her side. "I've given your family 17 separate violations over the past 6 months. 17 warnings. Your grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. Your mailbox was painted the wrong shade of white. Your daughter's bicycle was visible from the street. And now this. I have the authority to enforce compliance by any means necessary. It's written right there in the bylaws." "No bylaw in the world gives you the right to shoot a child," Mr. Chen shouted. His face had turned bright red with fury. In the distance, I could hear sirens getting louder and louder. Emma's breathing was becoming shallow and fast. Her skin felt cold and clammy under my touch. I kept applying pressure to the wound, kept talking to her softly, kept begging her to stay with me and not close her eyes. "Tell me about your drawing, baby," I said gently. "What were you drawing out here?" "Butterflies," Emma gasped out, struggling to speak. "Pretty butterflies? Pink and purple ones? Your favorite colors, Mommy, because you told me yesterday that you missed seeing butterflies in our garden." My heart shattered into a million tiny pieces right there. My sweet little girl had been drawing me butterflies with washable sidewalk chalk. Beautiful, temporary, completely harmless sidewalk chalk. And she had been shot for it. The paramedics arrived first, their red and white ambulance screeching to a stop right in front of our house. They were professional and efficient, moving with practiced speed. They gently moved me aside and immediately went to work on Emma. Their hands were sure and steady, even though mine were trembling so badly I could hardly control them. "Entry wound to the right shoulder," one of them reported to his partner. "Exit wound in the back, possible bone involvement. Blood pressure is dropping. We need to transport her right now." They carefully lifted Emma onto a stretcher. I climbed into the ambulance right behind her, never once letting go of her uninjured hand. As the ambulance doors started to close, I could see through the window that the police had arrived. I watched officers approaching Margaret, who was still standing on my front lawn with the gun at her side. She looked indignant rather than sorry or ashamed. "I want to press charges," I heard her say, just as the ambulance doors shut completely. "That child violated HOA regulations. I have all the documentation right here." The ambulance raced toward Mercy General Hospital with its siren wailing. Emma kept drifting in and out of consciousness. Each time her eyes fluttered closed, I felt like I was drowning in fear. "Stay with me, Emma. Please, baby, stay with me," I begged her. "Think about butterflies, sweetheart. Think about all those beautiful colors. Think about how we're going to paint your bedroom any color you want when we get home. Any color at all, I promise." "Even purple?" Emma whispered weakly. "Even though the HOA says we can only use neutral colors?" I choked back a sob. Even now, lying here bleeding and terrified, my precious baby was worried about breaking the rules. Rules that had been drilled into our heads through violation after violation, fine after fine, threat after threat for months. "I don't care anymore what the HOA says, sweetheart," I told her firmly. "I don't care about any of their stupid rules. The only thing I care about in this whole world is you." The hospital was in complete chaos. Doctors in surgical scrubs rushed past us. Nurses carried clipboards and shouted medical terms I didn't understand. Someone kept asking me questions that my brain could barely process. They needed insurance information. They wanted her complete medical history. They kept asking, "How did this happen? How did your daughter get shot? How does any mother in America explain to hospital staff that a neighbor shot her child over sidewalk chalk?" They wheeled Emma straight into surgery. I wasn't allowed to follow her. A kind nurse with warm brown eyes and a gentle voice led me to a private waiting room. She brought me a cup of water that I couldn't drink and a box of tissues that I couldn't stop using. "Your daughter is a strong little girl," she said gently, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "And Dr. Morrison is the very best trauma surgeon we have on staff. She's in the best possible hands right now." But Emma wasn't in my hands. She was in the hands of strangers, and that felt unbearable. My husband, David, burst through the waiting room door about 20 minutes later. He'd been at work 40 minutes away when Mrs. Patterson called to tell him what happened. His face was deathly pale, and his eyes were wild with fear. "Where is she?" he demanded, looking around frantically. "Is she alive? Please tell me our daughter is still alive." "She's in surgery right now," I managed to say through my tears. "They told me the bullet went completely through her shoulder. The doctors are working on her." David collapsed into the chair beside me. We held on to each other tightly, two parents united in absolute terror and helplessness. We had always done our best to protect Emma from everything, scraped knees and bad dreams and mean kids at school. But we hadn't been able to protect her from this. from a woman so completely consumed by petty power that she saw an 8-year-old girl drawing with chalk as some kind of threat that deserved violence. A police detective arrived about an hour later. Her name was Detective Sarah Rodriguez. She looked to be in her mid-40s with sharp, observant eyes that had clearly seen too much over the years, but they still held genuine compassion. She sat down across from us and took our complete statement, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "I want you both to know that Margaret Henderson has been arrested," she told us. "She's being charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and unlawful use of a firearm. But here's the thing you need to understand. She's claiming she acted within her legal authority as HOA president. She actually brought a copy of the HOA bylaws with her to the police station. There's nothing in any bylaw anywhere that allows someone to shoot a child," David said. His voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "No, there absolutely isn't," Detective Rodriguez agreed immediately. "But I need you to understand something important about this case. Mrs. Henderson genuinely believes she was completely justified in what she did. She's showing absolutely no remorse whatsoever. She's already demanded an attorney, and she's insisting that she plans to sue your family for all the violations your daughter has committed." I let out a laugh. It was a hollow, broken sound that didn't contain any humor. "She shot our daughter, and now she wants to sue us?" "I'm only telling you this so you're fully prepared for what's coming," the detective explained. "This is going to be an extremely difficult case emotionally. The defense is going to try every trick in the book. But I give you my word, we're going to make absolutely certain that justice is served." The surgery lasted exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes. I know this because I watched every single second tick by on that waiting room clock. Each one felt like an entire lifetime. When Dr. Morrison finally came out, still wearing her surgical scrubs with her mask pulled down, my heart was pounding so hard in my throat I thought I might pass out. "Emma is stable," she said, and I felt David's hand squeeze mine so tightly it hurt. The bullet caused significant damage to her shoulder joint and it fractured her scapula. That's her shoulder blade. She's going to need extensive physical therapy for quite some time, and I have to be honest with you, there may be some permanent limitations to the mobility in that arm, but she's alive, and she's going to recover. "Can we see her?" I asked, already standing up before she finished speaking. "She's in the recovery room right now," Dr. Morrison said with an understanding smile. "Give her another 30 minutes or so, and then you can sit with her for as long as you'd like." Those 30 minutes were genuinely the longest of my entire life. But when they finally took us back to see her, when I saw Emma lying in that hospital bed looking so small and pale but still breathing, still whole and alive despite everything, I completely broke down. I sat in the chair beside her bed and held her small hand in mine and cried tears I didn't even know I had left inside me. Emma woke up about an hour later. She was groggy and confused from the anesthesia, not quite sure where she was or what had happened. But when she saw David and me sitting there beside her, her face broke into a weak little smile. "Hi, Mommy. Hi, Daddy. Hi, baby girl," I whispered, leaning over to kiss her forehead gently. "How are you feeling?" "Really sleepy," she murmured. "And my shoulder hurts a lot." "I know it does, sweetheart. The doctors are giving you medicine to help with that pain. You're going to be just fine." Then Emma's face changed. She looked worried and scared. "Is Mrs. Henderson really mad at me?" she asked in a small voice. "I didn't mean to break the rules, Mommy. I was using washable chalk. I was going to wash it all off before dinner. I promise I was." "Baby, you didn't do anything wrong," David said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not one single thing. Do you understand me, Emma? You were just being a normal kid. You were creating something beautiful. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that." "But the rules," Emma started to say. "Some rules are wrong, baby," I interrupted her gently. "And anyone who would hurt a child for drawing pretty pictures with chalk is wrong. You are perfect exactly the way you are. And you don't ever have to worry about Mrs. Henderson again. Ever." Emma's eyes filled up with fresh tears. I was so scared, Mommy. It hurt so much. And she looked so angry at me, like I was a really bad person. I carefully climbed onto the hospital bed beside her, being very mindful of all her injuries, and held her as close as I dared. You are not bad. You are wonderful and creative and kind and smart. What happened to you should never, ever have happened to any child. But you're safe now. Daddy and I are right here, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to be right by your side. Over the next 3 days, Emma remained in the hospital under close observation. The response from our community was absolutely overwhelming in the best possible way. Our neighbors brought us home-cooked meals, beautiful flowers, and heartfelt cards. They organized a meal train so we wouldn't have to worry about cooking. They set up an online fundraiser to help with the medical expenses. They even organized a peaceful protest outside Margaret Henderson's house, demanding her immediate removal from the HOA board and major changes to the bylaws that had created such a toxic, dangerous environment. Mrs. Patterson came to visit with a container of homemade soup and tears streaming down her face. I should have done more, she said, her voice breaking. We all should have done more. Margaret has been getting worse and worse for months now. The constant fines, the threatening letters, the way she was always watching everyone. We were all afraid of her. But we should have stood up and said something before it ever came to this terrible point. This isn't your fault, I assured her, though part of me silently agreed with what she was saying. How had things gotten this bad? How had a simple neighborhood organization that was supposed to maintain property values turned into a dictatorship that had cost my daughter her innocence and nearly cost her life? The answer came together in bits and pieces through conversations with various neighbors and local journalists who picked up the story. Margaret Henderson had been serving as HOA president for 4 solid years. During that time, she had systematically driven out 3 entire families through absolutely relentless harassment. She had issued hundreds upon hundreds of violations for things so minor they would be laughable if they weren't so cruel. Dandelions growing in lawns, decorative flags that hadn't been pre-approved by the architectural committee, children playing too loudly in their own backyards. But it went much deeper than just being power-hungry and petty. We learned that Margaret's adult son had died 5 years earlier in a terrible motorcycle accident. He'd been speeding, wasn't wearing a helmet, and had broken multiple traffic laws. After losing her son, Margaret had become absolutely obsessed with rules, with order, with forcing everyone around her to comply with every regulation. In her twisted way of thinking, if rules could be enforced strictly enough, if everyone could be forced to follow them perfectly, then tragedies could be prevented. It was disturbed logic born from grief and unprocessed trauma. But it didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't bring back my daughter's sense of safety or the full use of her right arm. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. But Margaret's expensive attorney tried absolutely everything possible to get the case dismissed, or at least delayed. They argued that the HOA bylaws gave her broad enforcement powers that she was exercising. They claimed she had acted in legitimate defense of property values. They even had the nerve to suggest that Emma's presence on the sidewalk could be interpreted as threatening behavior. The judge shut that ridiculous argument down immediately. An 8-year-old child drawing pictures with washable chalk is not a threat under any reasonable interpretation of the law, he stated firmly. This case will proceed to trial as scheduled. Emma started her physical therapy sessions 2 weeks after being discharged from the hospital. It was incredibly painful and deeply frustrating for her. Simple movements that had once been completely effortless now brought tears to her eyes. She couldn't lift her arm above her shoulder anymore. She couldn't do the monkey bars at the school playground. She couldn't play the piano, which she had just started learning a few months earlier and absolutely loved. I hate this so much, she sobbed one night after a particularly difficult and painful therapy session. I hate that she did this to me. I hate that I can't do normal things anymore. I hate that I'm scared and jumpy all the time now. I held her close and let her cry for as long as she needed to, because what else could I possibly do? I couldn't magically give her back what had been stolen from her. I couldn't erase the trauma or instantly repair all the damage. All I could do was be there for her, be steady and strong, be the safe place she desperately needed. "You won't always feel this way, sweetheart," I promised her. "I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but it's going to get easier. You're getting a little bit stronger every single day. And one day, maybe not tomorrow or next week, but one day, you're going to be able to do everything you used to do. Maybe even more because you're so incredibly brave, Emma. You're so much braver than you even know." The community continued to rally around our family in ways that genuinely restored my faith in human kindness. The teachers at Emma's elementary school organized a special fundraiser. Local businesses donated gift cards and services. A wonderful group of parents formed something they called Butterflies for Emma. They went around town creating chalk drawings of butterflies on sidewalks all over the place, with permission from the property owners, of course. It was such a beautiful act of solidarity that it made Emma smile for the first time in weeks. The trial finally began on a bitterly cold January morning. The courthouse was absolutely packed with people. Local news cameras lined the entire street outside. Margaret Henderson arrived wearing a perfectly pressed, expensive-looking suit. Her gray hair was pulled back severely from her face. Her expression showed absolutely no emotion whatsoever. She looked like she was simply attending a routine business meeting, not facing serious criminal charges for shooting a child. I sat in the very front row with David. Our hands were clasped together so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white. Emma was staying with my mother that morning. We had made the decision to spare her from having to face her attacker until she needed to testify. I had barely slept at all the night before. I kept replaying that horrible day over and over in my mind, wondering if justice would truly be served, or if somehow Margaret would manage to find a way to escape full accountability for what she'd done. The prosecution's case was straightforward and absolutely damning. They presented Emma's detailed medical records and photographs of her terrible injuries. They brought in testimony from the paramedics and the surgeons who had treated her. They called multiple neighbors to the stand who described Margaret's increasingly disturbing behavior over the months and years, her constant threats, her obsessive enforcement of the most trivial rules imaginable. Mr. Chen testified about the time Margaret had actually threatened to sue him because his rose bushes had grown exactly 2 inches over the property line. Mrs. Patterson described receiving an astonishing 43 separate violation notices in a single year, with each one more petty and ridiculous than the last. A family that had moved away from the neighborhood 2 years earlier actually came back to testify. They explained how Margaret had made their daily lives so completely miserable that they'd had no choice but to leave, despite genuinely loving their home and wanting to stay. The pattern that emerged was crystal clear and deeply disturbing. Margaret Henderson had been building toward an act of violence for years. The shooting wasn't some isolated incident of temporary insanity. It was the natural culmination of years and years of unchecked power, steadily escalating aggression, and a complete disconnection from both reality and basic human decency. And then they called Emma to testify. My brave, beautiful daughter, still wearing a medical sling on her right arm, walked up to the witness box with her head held high. She was sworn in, and the prosecutor approached her with kind, gentle eyes. "Emma, can you tell us in your own words what happened on September 14th? He asked softly. Emma's voice was small, but it came out clear and steady. "I was drawing butterflies on the sidewalk in front of my house with colored chalk. Pink and purple ones because those are my very favorite colors. I was making them pretty for my mom." "Did anyone tell you that you weren't allowed to draw on the sidewalk?" "Mrs. Henderson sent us a letter once," Emma explained. "But my mommy said that sidewalk chalk was okay to use because it washes away completely when it rains. It's not permanent at all." "What happened while you were drawing your butterflies?" Emma's calm composure cracked just slightly. Her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Henderson came out of her house. She was yelling really loud about rules and violations and things like that. She said I was destroying the property values. I told her I was really sorry and that I would wash it all off right away, but she just kept yelling louder and louder. And then Emma's voice dropped down to barely a whisper. And then she pulled out a gun. I thought maybe she was just trying to scare me at first. But then it was so loud, and it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. And I didn't understand why she would do that to me. There wasn't a single dry eye in that entire courtroom. Even the judge had to pause for a long moment to compose himself before he allowed the defense attorney to begin his cross-examination. Margaret's attorney tried his best to paint Emma as somehow disrespectful, as a child who had repeatedly violated important community rules despite receiving multiple warnings. But Emma's complete innocence and her honest, straightforward answers shone through every single word she spoke. "Did you think the rules about sidewalk chalk were fair?" the defense attorney asked her. "I don't really know," Emma answered thoughtfully. "I think kids should be allowed to play outside and make art and have fun, but I also think people should try their best to follow rules when they're good rules that make sense. I just don't think shooting someone could ever be a good rule for anything." The defense attorney had absolutely no response to that simple statement of truth. When Margaret took the witness stand in her own defense, it was genuinely chilling to watch. She showed no remorse whatsoever, no understanding at all of the magnitude of what she had done. She spoke at length about property values and community standards and the critical importance of strict, unwavering enforcement of every single rule. She honestly, truly believed that she had been protecting the neighborhood and doing the right thing. "Those children were completely out of control," she said, her voice sharp and cold and unyielding. "Running around everywhere, making constant noise, leaving their toys scattered all over the place. Every single day, there was another violation. Every single day, there was another threat to our community's integrity and standards. Someone had to take a firm stand." "So your solution was to shoot an 8-year-old child?" the prosecutor said flatly, his disgust barely concealed. "I took the necessary action to enforce compliance with community regulations," Margaret corrected him stiffly. "You shot a child who was drawing pictures with chalk. I enforced the established rules." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours total. When they returned to the courtroom, their verdict was unanimous on every single count. Guilty of attempted murder, guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, guilty of child endangerment, guilty of unlawful use of a firearm. Margaret stood there completely emotionless as each guilty verdict was read aloud. She showed absolutely no reaction when the judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without any possibility of parole. She simply straightened her suit jacket and allowed the bailiffs to lead her away in handcuffs. But as she walked past our table, she turned her head to look at Emma one final time. And for just a brief moment, something flickered across her eyes. It wasn't quite remorse or regret, but perhaps it was a flicker of recognition. Recognition that her obsession with rules and control had cost her absolutely everything. It had destroyed multiple lives, that it had transformed her from a grieving mother into a convicted felon. "I hope you're satisfied with yourself," she said coldly to me as she passed. "You've completely ruined this neighborhood." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You did that all by yourself." The aftermath of the trial was long and complicated in many ways. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring from top to bottom. Margaret's harsh, draconian bylaws were formally repealed and replaced with reasonable, sensible guidelines that focused on genuine community well-being rather than petty control and power trips. 3 brand-new board members were elected, including Mrs. Patterson, who promised complete transparency and compassion in all future dealings. The community held several town hall meetings to openly discuss how things had been allowed to get so terribly bad. How had one single person been allowed to wield so much unchecked power with virtually no oversight whatsoever? People finally felt safe enough to share their own stories of harassment, of living in constant fear in their own homes, of actually teaching their children to hide and be quiet instead of encouraging them to play and laugh freely. It was absolutely heartbreaking to realize just how many families had suffered in complete silence, too afraid to speak up because Margaret controlled the fines and the liens and could make their lives even more difficult if they dared to complain. Brand new safeguards were put into place immediately. No single board member could issue any violations without getting approval from the full board first. There would be regular elections with strict term limits. A formal complaint process was established for any homeowners who felt they were being unfairly targeted or harassed. The entire neighborhood was absolutely determined to ensure that what happened to Emma could never, ever happen to another child. The local news coverage ended up bringing national attention to our story. We were invited to appear on several morning talk shows, but we declined most of them. This whole situation wasn't about becoming famous or getting publicity. It was about healing and seeking justice. However, we did agree to do one in-depth interview with a respected journalist who promised to handle Emma's story with appropriate sensitivity and use it to shine a light on the broader nationwide issues of HOA overreach and abuse of power. Emma's physical recovery continued, but it was slow and frustrating. After about 6 months of intensive therapy, she eventually regained most of the mobility and strength in her injured arm, but she still couldn't lift it quite as high as she could before the shooting. Her emotional and psychological recovery took significantly longer. She had frequent nightmares for many months. She became jumpy and frightened at any loud, sudden noises. She didn't want to draw or paint anymore. She didn't want to play outside. School became particularly difficult for her. Other children asked intrusive, sometimes cruel questions. Some of the parents would whisper and stare when they saw us. A few well-meaning but misguided teachers treated Emma like she was made of fragile glass that might shatter at any moment. Emma hated all of it intensely. She didn't want to be known forever as the girl who got shot. She just wanted to be Emma again, regular, normal Emma. We found her an excellent therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. Dr. Sarah Chen was absolutely wonderful, helping Emma process everything that had happened to her and giving her practical tools to cope with her fear and anger and confusion. Slowly, gradually, week by week, Emma began to genuinely heal from the inside out. The day she finally drew on the sidewalk again felt like a major victory for our entire family. It was nearly a full year after the shooting, on a beautiful, sunny Saturday morning. I sat on our front porch and watched as Emma knelt down on the concrete. She had a big box of chalk in every color of the rainbow sitting beside her. Her hand was shaking slightly as she picked up that first piece of chalk. It was pink, just like it had been before. She hesitated for a long moment, glancing back over her shoulder at me for reassurance and encouragement. "It's okay, baby," I called out to her gently. "You draw whatever you want to draw. You're completely safe out here." And she did. She drew butterflies again, dozens and dozens of them, spreading their colorful wings all across the sidewalk in brilliant shades. She drew beautiful flowers and bright rainbows and hearts. She drew words in big, cheerful letters: hope, brave, and free. The neighbors noticed what was happening and came out of their houses to watch and cheer her on. Mrs. Patterson brought her own box of chalk and knelt down to add to the growing masterpiece. Mr. Chen's grandchildren came running over and joined in enthusiastically. Within an hour, our entire cul-de-sac was completely covered in joyful, colorful chalk art. A community celebration of childhood and creativity and resilience and hope. Emma looked up at me with the first genuine, unguarded smile I'd seen on her face in many months. "Look, Mommy, butterflies everywhere, just like you always wanted." I got up from the porch and sat down beside her right there on that sidewalk. I wrapped my arm carefully around her shoulders, still being mindful of her healing injury. We sat there together in the warm sunshine, surrounded by beautiful chalk art and kind neighbors, and the certain knowledge that we had survived something truly terrible and come out stronger on the other side. "You know what, Emma?" I said softly. I was wrong before when I said I miss butterflies in the garden, because the most beautiful butterfly I've ever seen in my entire life is sitting right here next to me. You went through something so dark and painful, but you're still here. You're still creating beautiful things. You're still strong and brave. That's what real butterflies do, sweetheart. They transform. They survive. They spread their wings and fly. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. Her small body felt warm and solid and wonderfully, miraculously alive. I really like that, Mommy. I like being a butterfly. Me too, baby girl. Me too. The civil lawsuits that followed the criminal trial were complex and drawn out. We sued Margaret Henderson personally for damages, though she had very few assets left to actually compensate us with. We also sued the HOA itself for creating and maintaining an environment that had enabled her abusive behavior to continue unchecked for so long. That particular case ended up settling out of court for a substantial amount that would cover all of Emma's ongoing medical expenses and years of therapy sessions to come. But even more importantly than the money, Emma's case became a genuine catalyst for meaningful change across the country. New laws were proposed and ultimately passed in multiple states, specifically limiting HOA enforcement powers and protecting homeowners from overzealous, power-hungry board members. National homeowners' rights organizations formed to help protect regular families from abusive associations. Emma's story was featured in countless news articles, TV segments, and even documentaries, raising widespread awareness about the very real dark side of neighborhood associations when they become instruments of control and fear rather than genuine community building. Emma herself became an outspoken advocate at just 9 years old. She spoke at a city council meeting about the fundamental importance of letting children be children, of valuing human creativity over rigid conformity. She was surprisingly poised and articulate for her age, and she received a standing ovation from everyone in attendance. I used to think that rules were the most important thing in the whole world, she told the council members earnestly, but I learned the hard way that people are way more important than rules. Kindness is more important than rules, and kids should be allowed to draw pretty pictures with chalk without being afraid that something bad will happen to them. 2 full years after the shooting, Emma started taking piano lessons again. Her new teacher was incredibly patient and encouraging, working carefully with her physical limitations while celebrating all of her strengths and natural talents. It took quite a bit longer than normal to build up the strength and flexibility in her injured right hand, but Emma persevered with remarkable determination. The day she played her very first complete song using both hands, we all cried tears of pure happiness and pride. She had chosen to learn a piece called Butterflies Dancing. It was relatively simple, but it was absolutely beautiful, and she played it perfectly from start to finish. Her piano teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, pulled me aside privately after that particular lesson. She had tears shining in her eyes. "Your daughter has something truly special," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Not just natural musical talent, though she definitely has that too. But she has this incredible resilience, this big heart, this amazing ability to take something broken and damaged and make it whole again through sheer determination and love. That's genuinely rare, especially in someone so young." I watched Emma through the window of the music room. She was carefully packing up her sheet music with her good hand, while her injured arm moved much more fluidly and naturally than it had in many long months. She was softly humming the melody she had just played so beautifully. There was a small, contented smile on her face. "She gets that inner strength from her father," I said, though I knew deep down it wasn't entirely true. Emma's remarkable strength was completely her own. It had been forged in fire and trauma, refined through terrible pain and persistent effort. She had been forced to grow up far too fast, to face horrors that no child should ever have to experience. But somehow, miraculously, she had not been destroyed or permanently broken by any of it. Margaret Henderson remains in prison to this day, completely unrepentant, according to all reports. She has refused every single interview request. She refuses to participate in any rehabilitation programs. She refuses to acknowledge or admit